I'm Gabriela Houston. Welcome to my show where we talk about storytelling in all its forms. On the show, I talk to artists, journalists, researchers, other writers, of course, and more about how they use storytelling in their jobs and life. This week's guest is Jon Jacques, a global fundraising specialist legacies at Amnesty International. He focuses on building capacity for legacy fundraising with colleagues in Amnesty sections around the world to ensure human rights are defended long into the future. He's also worked for Save the Children UK and chaired the Will Aid charity for almost 4 years. Thank you for coming on the show, Jon.
That's all right, Gabriela. Thanks for inviting me.
So you have worked for different charities over the years. So what's drawn you to this kind of work in the first place?
I'm first of all to say I'm very proud to have worked for the charities I have done. It took me a long time to find a kind of path and purpose in life that was satisfying to me. Most of my early professional career was spent in marketing agencies, creative agencies, but working for predominantly commercial clients. And though I enjoyed the working as a team and working with creative colleagues, I didn't always get the satisfaction that what I was doing, the sweat of my brow was achieving. And it took me, a long time to figure out that what charities did in terms of fundraising was in fact many of the same skills and principles and audience communication and inspiration as I was used to using. And it was when that kind of penny dropped that I very quickly left the commercial world behind, probably forever, with the view that what I achieve with the time and the resources that are available to me in my professional career, etc., will make a difference, have an impact for people outside of company directors or what have you. So that was the kind of pathway into working for charity. And like I said, I've really enjoyed and felt significant satisfaction compared to what went before by working in the charity sector.
I mean, it's, no skill is ever wasted, in my opinion. So sometimes people think, oh, I did this, I don't really care for doing that. But the skills that they take from one job can actually help them achieve their long-term goals, and they just don't quite realize the connection.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think I was working on that basis back in the marketing agency, creative agency days. I mean, there was lots of how to bring together campaigns, how to manage campaigns. Also, I mean, on the subject of writing, I was often writing quite a lot of the copy for campaigns, or at least writing a draft that other writers could reinterpret, could rework. So, I mean, that sense of how to structure an argument, how to make it engaging and enticing, how to make pictures and pictures and words work together and using different channels and different approaches. It was never wasted, for sure. And that was the bit I enjoyed. That's what kept me there. But the sense of, the value, it's like when you're at a party or something and people ask you what do you enjoy, what do you do, what do you like. I would talk about the skills that I used rather than the motor clients or the mobile phone clients or the travel clients. Maybe occasionally the travel clients was interesting, but when I talk about working for a charity like British Red Cross, pretty much everyone around the world will know, maybe not the British part, but will know who the Red Cross is, understand what it achieves, and that you're contributing to helping people in sort of often the money that you raise is contributing to helping people in the darkest moments. It's quite a tangible thing.
I think it's, some of that, not to put too fine a point on it, is also due to the fact that people who are responsible for messaging of the charities, the charities can do their magnificent work, but unless they have people who are publicizing that work and who are spreading the word, then the charity itself will not survive very long, because it relies on public perception and relies on sort of public awareness as well.
Yeah, and to the point, public support,
Of
or
course.
or at least the willingness of a government to support a cause, in the people's name. I mean, but it requires funding. I mean, the idea that charities solely are fueled by volunteers, giving their extra time who are unpaid
Mm,
is, I mean, unrealistic. It was unrealistic 150 years ago. I mean, professional people
yeah.
either delivering the work or delivering the fundraising mechanisms or the awareness mechanisms for a charity to be truly successful, to truly achieve its aims and its objectives. It requires commitment of time and resource and energy and money, and it's
Of course.
and like I think when the penny dropped for me was when, well, actually the skills that I have can help fuel the changes that I would want to see in the world. Then it was okay. I can't, that is
Mm,
what I find satisfying. Sometimes the world that we live in is a very disappointing, upsetting, anger creating place. Often it is. And it's like
yes.
how, ultimately how you can sort of channel feeling like you're doing something to address those things rather than suffering, those
Mm.
particular emotions.
So taking that kind of element also of like, the charities need money to run, your job is to raise funds for Amnesty International and especially legacy fundraising. So can you explain what that is?
I most certainly can. So legacy fundraising is ultimately leaving money to fund the work of a charity by leaving a gift in a will. So most everyone, um, it's weird because now I work for Amnesty, I work in the global marketplace, and there are different rules around inheritance in different countries in the world. So, when I worked in the UK, it was very much easy to say everybody who wants to leave money to a cause or a loved one or a family member, you need a will to ensure that that happens. And gifts and wills are, in terms of the charity sector, they're worth around 3.5 billion every year to like across the UK. I mean, not across the world, in the UK. It's a significant proportion of leading charities' income comes from this particular source. And so
It's a
my
staggering amount, really, when you
it
think
it it
about it.
it is a staggering amount of money. I mean, it is when you compare like budgets that governments work with, when you consider so some of the budgets that I mean defense manufacturers and it's not maybe not that much, but as a proportion of some of the leading charities' income, I mean it's indispensable. It's incredible, and it comes from maybe not tens of thousands of people, but there's it's in the high thousands each year are the people who have decided that this is something that they want to do after they've looked after their loved ones. I mean, that's very important. This is not like all of their estate, or
Of
rarely,
course.
but it's this penny dropping moment happened actually when I worked. I kind of was transitioned into the charity sector. I was working for the last creative agency that I was employed by, who were a specialist charity agency. And for them, I looked after the RSPCA. The RSPCA was my client, dream client, and I looked after their acquisitions. So things like a cash gift, a regular gift, give £3, help us prosecute these evil people who do terrible things to these poor cats. So that was
Mhm.
direct mail, that was television advertising, that was some radio. But I was also looking after legacy fundraising, and the legacy fundraising aspect was um, ultimately it was showing the impact of how wonderful a relationship between a human and animal can be, how an organization that helps animals, the positive impact that they could have on the lives of, as I said, the people and the animals, how that the kind of the love that that person had for an animal can be sort of transformed into ensuring that animals long into the future get the
So it can
support that they need.
become their legacy.
Yeah, so that is the legacy aspect. And what dawned on me, Gabriela, was that the skills that I have and the time that I have available, if I really wanted to make the most amount of money for the charity sector, that I was able to do in the time I had available was to work in the legacy sector, because the value, the financial values. Now, there's a kind of trade-off. If and sort of any fundraisers listening to me will be thinking, there's a kind of there's a sort of shades of grey. You don't really ever know how much you actually have raised, because you don't know the true impact and the true value, because it takes many years for the legacy to be achieved, compared to like the £3 you will receive from a particular campaign. But the sense of value I got from that, and the sense of this is the path that I can make the biggest difference, if that makes sort of sense.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. It's really interesting when we talk about people's legacy, and because there's, something you touched on about how people perceive charities and they think that everything should be run by volunteers. And there is, I've seen this like research on kind of like how this research is more like statistics really about what percentage of donated money in each of the like sort of big charities goes towards the managing of it. And it was quite sort of shocking to see originally, because it is a high percentage, because it takes this much money for the charity to just be able to operate on that kind of even bare bones, before we talk about any marketing, before we talk about people raising money. And it's an adjustment to think about it. And then we talk about something that is like very kind of very beautiful concept of people wanting to create like a legacy. And of course there's like billionaires who sort of say they leave all their money to charity once they're done, but even though they have enough to solve some very real problems right now, just choose not to. But there's a balance between sort of pragmatism, I think, when we're talking about charities, and those very kind of idealistic concepts. And I think like how do you communicate that to people that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's, first of all, to say there's lots of different ways to communicate to people, and it depends on the audience and the platform really for that storytelling. But I think when we talk about the idealism, it's often something about I think about the origin of the charity stories, the passion, the commitment of an individual to see a problem and think, I'm going to address that, and I'm going to create an organization that addresses that particular problem. And that I find that not just unpalatable but unacceptable, and I feel so strongly about it that I'm going to form an organization, and I'm going to find a solution to it, and I'm going to put almost every charity will have asked either a donor with a wealthy donor, or maybe it's back in the Victorian days, a penny appeal, which was much more of a mass market appeal. But those kind of origin stories, I still think are quite powerful, particularly in the context when you're maybe thinking of a presentation, or you're speaking to a large group of supporters, showing that that idealism and that passion is still what drives the organization forward. And sometimes a charity's mission will change over time, or the landscape will change. But I think by linking it back to some of those, the sense of the original idea and the passion, and there's some really strong origin stories. I mean, would it be useful for the podcast if I was to sort of mention a few of them? Yeah. So you'll have seen on my LinkedIn page that I was very proud to work for Barnardo's out in Barkingside in East London for going on for 4 years. And sort of Thomas Barnardo, many kids, when I was at school, I learned about Thomas Barnardo. I learned about his story, and he was training to be a doctor in East London. and but he was like an evangelical Christian who also believed in the education of children. So in his spare time, he was running a kind of class, a ragged school they called them in East London, and this was like the 1860s, that kind of time. So lots of poverty, the industrialization, and lots of children living in London, uneducated, but as he discovered in his origin story, basically uncared for, unlooked after, and at the mercy of the those adults who would prey on them either for their well for everything really, but I mean, but particularly if you think of the kind of Dickensian Fagin world, for crime, for exploitation,
I mean, for
what have
sure,
you.
that still happens now. It's not, you don't
Oh
have to
no,
go as far
no,
as Dickens.
no, for sure.
Yeah.
It does. It does absolutely happen. But the origin story that we were told is about a boy who was in the school called Jim Jarvis, who when he was told the class is over, it's time to go home. He said, I haven't got home to go to. Where Thomas Bernardo asked, where did you stay? Thomas Bernardo, he said, I'll show you. And basically, in the part of East London in Whitechapel where he was living, on the roofs, in the gutters, they were all sleeping in the kind of hay lofts in the roofs. And he was like, well, this isn't right. This is
Yeah.
this isn't right. So anyway, but the motivation for him to give up his time, and he gave up his career as a doctor, and he's focused on finding homes where children wouldn't be turned away. And there's other aspects of the story about him deciding that no child will ever be turned away as this kind of motto for the cause. But that kind of motivation, but sharing that story and then linking it to what Bernardos do today. I mean, they work with children who have been sexually exploited across the country. They often through local councils. To be fair, they also look to find homes for children who are in need of adoption. So, like the motivation, the point of origin, the
Sorry,
kind of
through the local councils.
yeah. So what's happened?
There was a run-on sentence there, but I was.
Well,
Yeah, sorry.
it's recognizing that the models for childcare have changed since the Victorian age.
Oh yeah, yes,
and
of course.
it's the responsibility legally not of charities to find parents for children to be adopted. It's the local authority, but they do work with agencies who provide this resource. And Bernardo's is one of those, as well as fundraising for their own work and doing their own projects and developing new approaches. But like the nature of the works of charities can change significantly, and that's true of pretty much everyone I've worked for from their origins. But the sense of the ethos of why someone does this work and why people should support this work and help fund this work is kind of I could call it an umbilical. That might be a good analogy. But the motivation to try and achieve something with the support of others, and that you can have an impact on individuals' lives that will then, that the lives that they have prior to the impact of the charity may be very different, with more opportunities, and can be very positive. So it's the transformative nature of stories.
I've absolutely. I think this origins sort of story is incredibly impactful. And I mean, I would argue in the first place that charities, cannot exist without storytelling. It's, it's how they attract donors and communicate, their mission statement, how they, get institutional governmental support. And it's that spark as well, because I think everybody sees things they disagree with to varying levels every day, and things that make them uncomfortable. And you might pass by a homeless person that will make you uncomfortable, and but that like level of discomfort that we can cope with on like day-to-day basis obviously varies from individual to individual, but we sort of all titter on this edge of like, I can go on with my day. And then there's this spark, this sort of moment when you feel like you can't just pass it by anymore. And I think when charities communicate stories like this in an effective way, and they tell those stories, that they can create that moment where the person will actually, they might not go out into the street and actually help out, but they will reach for their wallet at the very least. And I was thinking about how you guys sort of curate stories and, picking the right ones to achieve the objectives. And, there's also the aspect of without minimizing people's struggles, making certain stories palatable for, the ads on the buses, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it is sometimes a very difficult situation for some charities to collect stories and to make them as strong as they ultimately they could be. I mean, certainly in the UK, and if we go back to the Barnardo's analogy, then there are rules about child protection. There are rules around ultimately being as authentic as you might want to be. So there's the necessity on occasion to almost try and create not make up a story. You take a real story, but how do you present the child,
Without
the
it being
individual
identifying, yeah.
without it being identifiable? Exactly. But and I'll move my experience really to Save the Children, which had an exceptional content collection team, globally based, many of them journalists, many of them with editorial training, but many of them, and I think over years of working with fundraising teams, these were in-house members of staff who collected stories and were able to structure and frame them so that they would be usable, not just as in a marketing concept, but like you could dial them up or dial them down for different audiences. The amount of information, say, a major donor might need, you'd still collect within the framework of the story. And how to put it, but equally you could tell a story of the impact of supporting this work, maybe with an image, with a title, and with a case study. But I worked with some extremely talented people who understood the importance of storytelling and the link to legacy. So would you like me to give you an example from
Please.
my time there? It's going to be a legacy example because that's how they were the campaigns that I worked on. But when at Save the Children, we did quite a bit of audience research. Audience research from a fundraising perspective is really to get an insight into why people care about a cause or why they don't. Where's the disconnect? What needs to kind of work in that umbilical space to really motivate people. And the issue with Save the Children as a cause, people believe in the emergency context. They understand the sense of an emergency, a global emergency, I mean, a tsunami or the need to give in that context. But other than that, there are very few times that they will come into contact with, certainly in the UK, a sense of the work that's being done for children. There's definitely a lack of knowledge about how Save the Children work, what they do. There's a sense of, okay, it's around education, right? And it's feeding children, and maybe it's immunizing children. But what is the work that Save the Children do, and how is it funded? And so I worked actually very early in my career at Save the Children with the content team, and we were talking about how do we give people a sense of what the brand does? What is the essence of our brand, and how can we bring that to life, and how can we inspire people to want to leave a legacy to achieve this work? And the content team, the lady called Vicky, had done a trip, I think it was a few years before, to Liberia, and had been to a clinic that had been built as part of a capital appeal. So it was like give to fund the building of this clinic in this very remote part of Liberia. And she'd met a midwife called Alice, and she was kind of recalling some of the video that she just kept rolling. The team had packed up, like the crew had packed up, but she's going to come back. Let's just record this the Alice story. And the Alice story was this: that in Liberia, when a midwife has helped a couple or a woman have a baby, often the way they say thank you to the midwife is to name the child Alice. And so the content provider, Vicky, was saying, well, so how many Alices are there? And she was like, there's like over 800 Alices. There are over 800 Alices in this corner of Liberia. And it was like, oh, okay, that's a really interesting concept. So the idea of that, your legacy could help, could help, help clinics like this ensure safe and healthy births, and that like Alice's legacy is these children named after them. Well, if you're funding it, could it not be your legacy as well? The idea that your gift is helping the safe birth and child health of these children. Anyway, that was the kind of essence of the story that we work with. We sent out a Vicky to just check that Alice was still working for Save the Children, that the clinic was still there, the situation, and then we organised a crew to go out. There was a very sort of loose crew in terms of there was a film producer who led the crew, a researcher, a photographer, not too many, but we basically scripted like a television ad around Alice's experience. Filmed the elements, came back, edited them together, created a voiceover, hired. No, we didn't hire. We actually, the only volunteer involved in the whole project was the actress who gave us the voiceover to this narrative story about how this is what a legacy could achieve, which is safe, healthy children. That was funded by a legacy. So it was that kind of storytelling, but finding the right story, but finding the right person who understood what you were looking for. There is aspects of everyone's working life that you need someone with a particular eye and a particular objective and can see how that story might be used. And there were positive and negative aspects of how the campaign performed, but in terms of recognition with the key audience of people who would consider leaving a gift, the recognition of this story was really high. It got picked up by the BBC. The BBC retold the story. The national newspapers, who are generally not friends of the charity sector, and particularly organisations like Save the Children, picked the story up because they wanted to find out more about this character.
I mean, it's a very compelling narrative, isn't it? And it's quite because something that people remember: 800 Alices in that part of Liberia.
Well, that's it. And it was also there was the way that the film producer kind of brought the emotion out, because it's also really, really important. The truth of certainly in a television ad is you need to get a kind of emotional reaction. I think is how you land a message, is linking it to emotion, whether be it joy, be it or be it tremendous sadness. With this ad, it was about joy. There was a moment where all the there's a sense all the Alices came back to the clinic, and the producer hired a drone. It was the first time I've ever worked with I wasn't there, but a drone was being used, it seemed like. So you got a sense of the remoteness in the storytelling, but you also got the sense of all the Alices running to be with Alice the midwife, and the kind of how emotional that would be. And it was like, oh wow, that's great. That's when creativity really.
And then the jump to taking that and then making that jump to your legacy could be 800 little kids born safely.
Exactly.
And that is and that's quite a powerful message. And I really love how positive that is, because you see a lot of I would say that like the majority of ads you see for charities are the really sort of traumatizing stories, and some of it is relying on a kind of shock value of you see this person covered in blood, and that is supposed to sort of hopefully cause people to sort of empathize. But in terms of messaging, this is such a positive, because when you leave money to charity in your will, when you think about it being your last action, you want it to be something that you will be like, maybe not everybody that leaves money, but they want the kind of like, this is like my achievement, like when people talk about legacy, they think about like, this is something I've achieved, like I've built up this little
Yeah.
pile of wealth, and that this pile of wealth can produce this very positive result.
Yeah. There's in the sector and a colleague or a peer in the sector is a psychologist and looks at some of the rationale for leaving gifts. And one of the things she talks about very frequently, she's called Claire Outley and is a real talent. But she talks about the psychological importance of symbolic immortality. The idea by leaving a gift, by doing something positive in that way, you somehow continue to exist, and it's kind of balancing the terror of our own mortality. We all know we're going to pass away, but we carry on. And I mean, it's an idea that I'm really keen to, because I've only been at Amnesty for a year or so, and the sense of the spirit of protest against injustice living on, that your spirit lives on, I think is a really kind of really powerful idea. By leaving a legacy, you're alongside those people fighting for human rights long into the future, for the generations to come, for those who will need
they make people who leave for money in their wills to charities, they actually allow those charities to function, which is
totally
not something to sort of pass over. And I think there is an element also, like when you talk about immortality, I think people want to sometimes rewrite the story of like how people perceive them. I feel like I saw, and I have no way of verifying it, it's something I saw on social media, so I'm sorry if that is not true, but I saw that apparently Jeff Bezos said that he is looking to eventually, putting no timeline on it, give away most of his, something like $120 billion, wealth to charities. And I was thinking about how, Jeff Bezos, because of his, attitude to, how he treats his workers, how he sort of, I mean, we could go on, but for a variety of reasons, Jeff Bezos has incredibly bad public perception. And then sometimes I feel like people like that feel, because nobody feels like, well, that's fair, I'm the devil, like, so they want to kind of rewrite that in a way and say like, well, maybe I'm, destroying the unions and not letting people go to toilet when they're at work, but look, I'm giving this and my legacy will be X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I mean, people, the some of the rationale for leaving gifts is your own personal narrative story, and it can be the narrative of, you might be remembering a particular charity because you're maybe honoring a loved one, but equally sometimes the motivation can be not as positive. It can be guilt, it can be quite distressing. It can be, as a attempt to cleanse oneself in some way or change the perception. And I mean, sometimes charities, and I don't really have great examples for you from my experience, but I know in the sector sometimes charities have to refuse a legacy gift, not from Jeff Bezos, but I mean, but like from people who
take his money,
yeah, but from people who are criminals, and
of course
are trying to redeem themselves in some way.
I mean, if they're criminals, then there's also the legal implications.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
You can't, if the money doesn't like technically legally belong to someone, you could get into a lot of trouble.
No, I mean, I'm thinking about I mean, people who have done crimes against children wanting to leave the gift to a children's charity. So in terms of the PR implications for a charity like that, I mean, I don't want to go into any detail, but those things do happen. I mean, charities do rightly have to do due diligence on all sizable gifts that are left to them. There are very strict rules in most organizations about where the money comes from, not just for things like money laundering, but there are other, there are people for whom it would be inappropriate or would have an impact on the sense of impartiality of a cause, and a sense of maybe being bought off. So there's all those kind of
It's
rationale.
well, that must be incredibly hard, though, to refuse money that the charity
Oh,
sorely needs.
totally. But if the implications politically are that you're no longer trusted, and this is
Mm.
this is
It's a
the
long
this is the
game, yeah.
the key thing I would say to you, Gabriela, about certainly legacy giving is that absolutely trust in that organization, that organization is going to do absolutely the right thing, you to use the money to have the greatest impact in the way that you would want it to. If there's no longer trust in that organization that it's effective, or that it's yeah, I'm thinking of an organ. I don't want to cause aspersions, but Kids Company went bankrupt. But my point about it is, if there's distrust in a charity, that's when sometimes it can be the actions that they take, the principles they might stand up for that may not be the original principles that
Mm.
the supporter originally decided, or something they disagree with. But if there's that sense of trust, it breaks the umbilical. It
Yes.
absolutely does. And sometimes at things that happen high profile with any charity, and it happened with Oxfam, with the without going in again too much detail, there was issues with the Charity
Oh,
Commission
yes.
around Haiti, but it brought discredit on really kind of the whole of the
The
sector,
whole
because
sector,
yeah,
yes.
people don't remember which charity it was. They just perceive that this is a truth, and so yeah, management of stories in general is important. But this is why there are teams in certainly some of the bigger charities that will do due diligence on not just who's leaving legacies, but who they accept money from, and
Yes.
so that trust and that impartiality and that
Can
effectiveness and
remain.
that trust can remain, because it's
Mm.
essential.
Yes. I mean, people have, this when we're talking about like early charities and sort of that they were often for the, so-called worthy poor, for the chaste widows and the little
Yeah,
orphan children, like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
they were not for people who were considered unworthy. And this idea that a lot of people are kind of pushing this narrative that charity work should not be provided to people who fail our morals, by our moral
mm,
standards, is
yeah,
something that is seems to be gaining ground from what I've seen,
yeah.
and that's a bit worrying.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it's. I mean, when if we think back to the Victorian times and Bernardo's, I mean, the children were very much seen as the sort of the innocent, but also it was a time of religious movement to sort of save the souls of children. How could they have their souls saved if they hadn't heard the word of whichever, well, the Christian religion?
Mm,
So I mean, there is that aspect to them. Now, whether that's the, I mean, I think it was, a very simple narrative at the time. It probably was quite motivating for those audiences, to protect the innocent. And I think, we're talking about the
mm,
RSPCA. The animals are always, the innocent as well. So through no fault of their own. I mean, where I would kind of come to is I'm thinking of homelessness charities, homeless charities,
mm.
and they certainly in the from the 1960s onwards, organizations like Shelter, like Centerpoint, um focus really on, or people that you might potentially think, well, hold on, they're consuming alcohol, they're consuming drugs or whatever.
Or
But
that they want to be homeless. I've heard that
well,
one.
yeah, that
That
position being
was,
shown. Oh, it
yeah,
was it
it was
was
shockingly popular, that position as
yeah,
well.
but that Suella Braverman I think it was Suella Braverman, or was it? It was one of them who said it was a lifestyle choice. Being homeless
Oh,
is
yeah.
or was it Jacob Rees-Mogg? But it's definitely on the right, and this
Mm.
sense of, and like that is, utterly appalling. It doesn't give any sense of the individual stories, and I think what the homelessness charities, and I've not worked for any. I mean, I would love to at some point in my career. But the idea of if we were to tell those individual stories, the fact that they're homeless because they were being beaten, because they were being abused, because it was impossible to be living in any other situation. I think that's when again the importance of telling a story that any of us could have succumbed to,
Mm.
in a particular time, just given by the accident of birth. That is it's the scenario, or maybe they were soldiers. I mean, there were plenty of people who were help for heroes who have become homeless. There's lots of rational stories.
Mm.
It does not mean they do not deserve our support or help, and that turning to the right, and I don't think I necessarily see it in the charity sector. I might see it in public opinion.
And it's shocking to me how often I've seen people sort of, because when we talk about people who kind of anti-charity, we tend to think about them more being on the right, or like, oh, you should pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of people. And then you can put the put down when you're ready.
Yeah.
But I see it on both sides, and there's just basically slightly different stories being woven to dehumanize and
Mm.
discredit people who need charity work. And I think like all those, like this positive story that you told me about Alice the midwife, like that's quite a powerful and very humanizing way to show the need for charities, isn't it?
Hmm. Yeah, and the ethos. I mean, the the importance, certainly when we the attitudes to, say, homeless people, to migrants, to children, forced into these circumstances because of certain of the global politics that we live in, the globe, the lack of global leadership in places like Syria. I mean, this is over 10 years. I mean, this is when it's a knock-on effect. So, is it important for me to show the humanity in people's struggle, and how we can help improve the situation, how we can show the humanity of? Is it important to do that now more than ever? I would say.
Mm.
Um, is it working? Is the world a better place? That I would find a very, very difficult um, question to answer, because from the like I said, for some of the examples of, I mean, I was working on campaigns around Syria 10, 15 years ago at the Red Cross, and the situation just didn't improve, and it's
Yeah.
so I don't.
I mean, individual people that were
Yeah,
helped,
yeah,
their condition improved,
and
but
yeah.
it's
I mean, what I would say to you, Gabriela, is some of the supporters who I've met. I mean, it's one of the joys. I haven't really talked about why people leave legacies, and some of the people who have done so. I mean, that balances that's the sense of kindness and generosity, and just brilliant people who've lived their lives, and in a way that they're proud to show who they were and why they've done things. And even if with people who didn't have that much to give, have done it because they believe in the cause and they believe in humanity. And I've met quite a few of those, and many of them
mm,
have left their kind of imprint on me, and their stories are the counterbalance to the kind of the selfishness, the meanness. And like, the world is not as polarized as that. There are good people, and there are people who care, and there will people
mm,
who will, like, put their money where their mouth is, maybe is the good way of a nice way of putting it. But and I've met those people at pretty much every charity I've worked for, and I include that in many of the staff. I mean, the thing I would say about the charity sector: nobody works in the charity sector to become millionaires. There is nobody,
of
I mean,
course.
and so this belief that it's wrong to be paid. Well, all of us have
You
to.
have to live.
Well, and to
Yeah,
do this work, and to raise a family, I do need to be paid.
of
But
course.
but
Yeah.
it's like, if I wanted to work back in the marketing industry, maybe for an automotive company, it would be, the contrast would be significant. However,
Mm.
However, do I really want to have a sense of responsibility about the pollution, the climate desire, the climate? No, I would. And the other thing about the charity sector is when things around the awareness of the environmental impact of the work is taken into account. The
course.
decisions that are made are factored in.
I think any organization that rests upon the foundation of sort of trust and sort of adherence to sort of ethics, sort of ethical system, I should say, because those can be very different, needs to be looking at things like that, especially at the moment. And I was wondering also in terms of the stories that, because you come across such extremes in your work. And I think like it's just something that you touched on, like, you do see the extreme sort of meanness and sort of, the attempts to dehumanize people and, some horrific stories. And then on the other side, you see people who are, willing to help. You see the helpers.
Yeah, and I get to work with those people. I can tell you that the sense of community in not in most scenarios, but I've got to work with some absolutely brilliant people who are committed, who are supportive, who are collaborative, who are, the emotion that you can feel is a joy, and it's one of the great benefits of just working with people who care, who are committed, who are professional, who are skilled, who are talented, and it's a really great feeling. And I mean, it's not always there. I wish it was. There are bad times and good times, but when it's at its when you're surrounded by people who think actually we could change the world, actually the energy in this room, the positivity could change the world, and
it can make you believe as well.
Yeah, totally. And it balances, and and when you can see you're not alone just with a computer. And I think that sense of humanity and community is integral. And I think my theories about Facebook are probably not scientific at all. But I think we spend too much time with streams and in scrolling than we do with other people sometimes, to make our own judgments. And maybe that's what the social media world is kind of preying on a little bit.
And
yes,
I think it definitely does sort of serve people and sort of social media to present a lot of subjects as black and white, and to not allow any room for conversation, discussion, or changing mind. Because when you sort of present things as very black and white and you don't allow people into the conversation and you show them no empathy or kindness, you will never change their minds. And
no.
as I'm sure you and people you work with will understand it quite well, that in order to change people's minds, and especially people who are in power, people who have the capacity to make the changes that you seek, you have to also seek to see their humanity. You have to be able to tell them stories in a way that will speak to them.
Yeah, for sure.
That is a nice place to stop, I think. Thank you again so much, Jon, for this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure, Gabriela.
Thank you for watching the video. Every week there's something different, so click like and subscribe if you would like more. It really helps the channel. Thank you, and see you next week.